Aloha champions, and welcome back to my library. Today we are finishing up Sing Down the Moon. We've got chapters 21, 22, and 23 for us to read. So, like we've been doing, you can either watch the video of Mr. Chambers reading the story, or you can read it on your own. PDF should be attached on Google Classroom for us. So we're finishing up the story. We've done a few activities to help us think more about the story, and now it is coming to an end. As I said in our previous video, next week, provided everybody has picked up their materials from the school, we will be starting on another book called Sylvia and Aki. So that will be our next literature study book. For today, we're finishing up Sing Down the Moon, chapters 21, 22, and 23. At the end of chapter 20, we found out that Bright Morning, who recently got married to Tall Boy, is expecting a child in 5 months' time, and she's made herself a promise. She does not want her new child to be born in Bosque Redondo in the shadow of the Great Fort. So, knowing that she's made that promise, let's see how she tries to keep this promise for herself and for her child as she tries to escape from Bosque Redondo, where all the Native Americans, Navajo, and Apache have been held prisoner for the last few months to a year. Chapter 21. There was no wool to be found anywhere in the village, and when I asked one of the Long Knives if there was wool at the fort, he did not answer. I thought he did not understand Navajo, so I made the sign of a blanket and weaving. He sat on a horse beside the wagon that was bringing us flour. He looked away, and he said nothing. Soon afterward, I traded my turquoise bracelet for 3 old blankets of a fine black and white design. By taking one of them apart, I was able to save enough thread and repair the other 2. The family used them at night, but I took good care of them, for they would go with us the day that Tallboy and I would leave Bosque Redondo. I spent a long time saving food. Every morning when I made the gruel for the family, I put 2 pinches of flour into a gourd and hid it away in the lean-to. At breakfast, I ate 2 pinches less than the others, so things would be even. It took me all the mornings between 2 moons to fill the gourd, which was enough for a journey of 3 days. The next time the wagon came, the white soldiers gave us less flour than before, and I did not try to save any of it. Still, there was enough for the 2 of us. If we could find some other food along the way, I told Tallboy about the blankets and the food that I had hidden in the lean-to. "It is a foolish idea that has hold of you," he said. "Before we cross the river, they will find our tracks in the snow." "We can go when the snow melts," I said. "We can go at night in fair weather and leave no tracks for them to find." He shook his head, looked at me gently as if he felt pity for me. "We will talk about it sometime," he said, turning away. I knew that he would never think of it again, unless I did. He was like someone who was under a spell. He was like my father, like all of the Navajo men, and as if he had been forsaken by the gods. But I did not give up my plans for us to flee from Bosque Redondo. A few days later, we borrowed the speckled horse and went down to the river to cut some firewood. It was also growing scarce, and we had to search to find a tree that was worth cutting. We wandered through the river thickets all morning, but had only half a load to show for our work. At noon, we went back to where the old horse was tethered. My black dog growled before we got there, and I saw an Apache standing beside the horse. Tallboy spoke a greeting. The Indian did not answer. Instead, he pointed to the wood on the horse's back. "Mine," he said. "This wood belonged to Apache." Tallboy untied the horse, humming a little song to himself, which was a sign that he was angry. "You get wood on Apache land," said the young Indian. "No good, no like." He stepped in front of the horse as if he meant to keep it from moving away. As the horse started to walk around him, he reached out and gave it a blow on the muzzle. The horse had been given many blows in its life from the way he looked, and he just stopped and waited. But Tallboy walked over and took a length of wood down from the horse's back. He gripped it hard in his one good hand. The Apache had a square chest and spindly legs. He squinted his eyes, which were black as a lizard's, and glanced at the length of wood Tallboy held in his hand. Then he took a step forward towards my husband, raising a fist. Tallboy struck quickly as a snake strikes. The blow landed on the Apache's outthrust arm. He dropped the stone that he held in his fist. A second blow knocked him off his feet, and he fell in the snow and lay there stunned. We took the horse, and we went home. I looked back and saw the Apache get to his feet and stagger off. That night, while we were eating supper, 2 soldiers came. They walked into the hut without saying a word and took Tallboy away. I could not sleep that night thinking about him. My father went to the fort the next morning, and I went with him. There was a big gate in the wall. It was closed, and we stood outside in the snow waiting for it to open, but no one came all day. The next morning, we went back to the gate. We waited until noon, and then it opened, and a soldier took us into a courtyard. We waited there until the sun went down. Then a soldier came out and told us to leave, but to come back in the morning, which we did. All morning, we walked up and down in the courtyard, trying to keep warm. About noon, a long knife led us into a room where 2 men sat. One of them was a soldier, and the other was a Ute Indian who told us what the officer said and told him what we answered. The white officer had blue eyes and a red beard. He wore a hat with a gold cord around it and asked me what my name was. Bright Morning, I told him, but I did not give him my secret name, and he did not ask for it. Bright Morning, he said, tell me what happened when you were gathering wood. It was bad manners for him to say my name when I was standing there in front of him, but perhaps he did not know this, so I told him everything that happened by the river, as I remembered it. He said, Tallboy is my husband, and he is needed at home. Magnus, the Apache, has a home too, and he is needed, the soldier said, but now he has a broken arm and cannot work. Neither the riverbank nor the wood that grows there belongs to him, I said. The arm is his fault. The officer looked at me sharply with his blue eyes. Whose fault it is, he said, is for me to decide, not you. He began to look at the papers on his desk. The soldier took us to the gate and let us out, and we walked home through snow that was beginning to fall. What are the Long Knives going to do to him? I asked my father. He has done no wrong, my father answered. It is not wrong to shield yourself from a man with a stone. It will send him home soon. Chapter 22. The snows melted and warm winds blew over Bosque Redondo, and green grass began to show all along the banks of the river. The big gate at the fort opened every day. The Long Knives marched out, the drums beat, and the horns sounded. Then the soldiers went back in, and the gates closed. I waited every day, but my husband did not come. With spring settled on the land, the wagons brought more food for us, and I was able to save another gourd of flour. We now had enough food to last us on a journey of 6 days. Besides the 2 good blankets, we had a knife, which was like those that the soldiers used on the ends of their rifles. I found it one morning when I went up to the fort. It was wrapped in a cloth and hidden in the grass. I sharpened it on a stone and put it away in the lean-to. The cloth, which was an arm's length of red velvet, would make a girl's small dress or a jacket for a boy. It was a warm night with many stars and the sound of the river running far away. We had just eaten our supper when Tallboy came. He walked in so quietly that my black dog did not hear him. He sat down at the fire and ate everything that was left in the pot, hurriedly as if he had never eaten before. He looked gaunt and fearful. My father said, "Did the Long Knives open the gate for you?" "They did not open the gate," Tallboy replied. "The gate was not open?" "No." "But you are here." "I am here because of a hole in the wall," Tallboy said, "which I have known about for many weeks." "Where is this hole you have known about?" "It is in the place where they cook the food." "Is it a round hole or one that is square?" "Neither one nor the other," said Tallboy. "It is the hole where they shove all the garbage." "Yes, I have heard of this hole," my father said. "The garbage goes through and falls on the ground outside the wall, and the people go there and pick it up." "That is the hole," Tallboy said. "Of a size right for crawling?" "When no one looks. When everyone has left the place where they cook the food. And the people have come and carried away all the garbage." "That is the time," Tallboy said. "When will the Long Knives know that you have crawled through the hole?" "In the morning, when they come to cook breakfast." "Not sooner nor later?" "Then," my husband said. He sat staring into the empty pot. I brought him a bowl of corn mush, which he ate in a hurry, and then he fell silent, sitting on his haunches with one arm dangling at the other and the other on his thigh. I thought that we could get up at any moment, that the two of us would flee the camp. But he sat there beside the fire, looking as if he might fall asleep. "The Long Knives will come in the morning," I said. "You will wake up behind the walls of the fort again." He glanced at me, blinking his eyes, and I suddenly knew that he had gone as far as he wished to go. He was back with his family. He had eaten our food. He would sleep beside our fire. What happened to him tomorrow did not matter. He was still blinking at me, halfway between waking and sleeping. "Are you an old woman?" I asked him. He stopped blinking. "An old woman," I went on, my voice rising. "A woman who eats a lot and dozes beside the fire." My mother said, "He is worse than an old woman. He is like the old men of the Navajos, all of them." Tallboy got to his feet and unhitched his belt, making room for the big supper that he had eaten. My mother looked at him at his feet. She would have liked to look him in the face as she did with me when she was angry. But it was against our tribal law for the mother-in-law to look at her son-in-law this way. She looked at his feet for a long time. "He will soon have to change his name again," she said. "What do you think it should be? Boy who sits at the fire? Boy who sleeps standing up? Or something else, like crawling through a hole?" "I will need to think hard," I said. "We shall both think hard," my mother said. Tallboy looked at my mother's feet and then at me. He walked slowly around the fire and went outside. I heard him take a deep breath. I stood there, and I felt like crying. I had not cried since the day that we left our home. After a while, I sat down beside the fire, and I cried. I cried for a long time, and nobody tried to stop me. Then Tallboy came to the doorway and spoke my name and beckoned me to follow him. When I went outside, the first thing I saw was the old speckled horse that belonged to my father-in-law. "We go now," Tallboy said. He made a saddle of the 2 blankets and tied down the gourds that were filled with flour, the sharp knife that he put in his belt. We did not say goodbye to our family. They knew that we would take their thoughts with us and leave our thoughts for them. Tallboy got on the horse and we set off through the warm darkness. I had to run to keep pace with him, but when we got to the river, he let me climb up behind him. I untied the 2 gourds and hung them around my neck to keep them out of the water. My black dog I held in my lap. The river ran swift and cold as the horse plunged into the water. The current swept us out and back to the shore. On the 3rd try, we kept going toward the far shore. We would have drowned except for the old horse. He must have been across the river many times in his life, for he knew how to float with the current and swim if he needed to. There was no moon, but all the stars were out, shining on the water. When we reached the shore, I jumped off the horse and we went along the trail that we had used once before. Someday I hoped to have a horse of my own, and then I would ride beside my husband. Perhaps he would not own a horse by this time. Then it would be he who would have to walk. Across the river, the evening fires of Bosque Redondo glowed softly. We left them far behind, moving along the trail until dawn. Then we made a fire and cooked some mush beside a small lake. My husband said, "This is the time the Long Knives will find that I have gone. We have the night between us, but they will come fast." "They will not follow us," I said, to calm him and myself. "There are thousands of Indians at Bosque Redondo. Will the Long Knives bother to look for one? And if they do, which way will they go? If they do anything, it will be to search the village. Our friends will tell them nothing." We slept until the sun was high and awakened to the barking of my black dog. There were soldiers on the trail. By putting our ears to the earth, we could hear the steps of their horses, but they came from the west. From our hiding place, we watched them pass, driving a small band of Navajos toward Bosque Redondo. Tallboy pulled the knife from his belt, and I think that he would have rushed out and attacked the soldiers alone if I had not pleaded with him. As it was, we made so much noise that one of the Long Knives stopped his horse and looked in our direction before he rode on. We left the small lake and rode to the northwest, but we had not gone far when my husband said, "There are places closer to the Canyon de Chelly where we can hide. These places are safer also. The Long Knives do not watch them like they watch the canyon." "But the canyon is our home," I said. "We have lived there. We know where wood is and water is, food, the sheep." "What of the sheep?" I was walking beside him and he glanced down at me in scorn. "Sheep? They are eaten by the wolves, as I have told you," he said. If there are some left, what do we do with them? Where can we graze them, that they will not be seen by the Long Knives?" "We will be careful where we graze them," I said. "There are hidden places that I know." He shrugged his shoulders, which he did when he did not want to talk about something, and he fell silent. We went on for 6 suns, ate the last of our flour, and then snared rabbits and squirrels. I was certain that my husband had decided to go to Canyon de Chelly after all. But on the 7th day, Tallboy left the trail and we went northward over a ridge into a wooded, rolling country. He had hunted there once and called it Elk Running Valley. A stream ran down from the high mountains and wandered through a meadow until it came to a dam that beavers had made from brush and trees. There the stream backed up and formed a small pond with grassy banks. We built a hut beside the pond and lived in it through the summer. It was here where my son was born. After that, Tallboy brought down poles from the high country, dragging them behind the speckled horse. He made the hut larger and strengthened the roof for winter snow. He fashioned a throwing stick, and he killed 2 young deer. He was busy all the time hunting or making something. He still could not use his injured arm, but he had become quick and skillful with the other one. He no longer seemed to think about that injury. I was busy too. I worked the deer hides with a bone scraper and softened them in my mouth and made a pair of leggings for my son. I also made him a jacket out of the velvet that I had saved and a heavy coat from a beaver pelt. Yet not a day went by that summer or when the snows came that I did not think of my sheep. Chapter 23. One morning early in the spring, while we were eating breakfast, soldiers appeared on the ridge. Our lean-to was hidden among the pine trees and could not be seen from where they stood, nor could they see the speckled horse, which was tethered beyond the lean-to. We felt uneasy nonetheless. The Long Knives came down from the ridge, riding fast. We were ready to flee, but they turned away from us and headed into the south. "The Long Knives will travel for 1 day. No longer," Tallboy said. "I have been in the canyon where they are going. They cannot get through. They will have to turn back. We can look for them tomorrow." We finished eating our breakfast. The spring sun was warm. Beaver were working on their dam, cutting brush on the banks and swimming across the pond with it. Tallboy sat with his son in his lap and watched them for a long time, going back and forth. Then we loaded the old horse with our clothes and some dried deer meat and left Elk Running Valley before the sun was high. We kept off the trail that the soldiers had used. At the top of the bridge, we went north and west. It was in the direction of our canyon, but I was afraid to ask my husband whether we were going there or not. If we were, then it would be better not to ask him. Sometimes if he was asked too many questions, he would change his mind and do something else. I was not certain that they were going home until on the evening of the 5th day, I saw high ramparts against the northern sky. They were crimson in the setting sun. Even the tall trees along their edges were crimson. I felt like shouting and dancing, like running around in circles, as I always did when I was very happy. But I walked quietly through the spring grass as if I saw nothing there in the sky. Tallboy was riding in front of me. He spoke and he pointed to the north. Yes, I said calmly. We go because I am tired of hearing about sheep, he said, and for no other reason. It is a dangerous place to go. There are no sheep left, but still I go. If there is one left, it will be shaggy like a buffalo, and so wild you will have to catch it in a trap. But I go because I am tired of the sheep talk. Oh, coyote brothers in the far and near hills, I am tired of sheep. He nudged the speckled horse and rode on out of sight. My son was strapped into a carrying board slung over my back. I stopped and took him out of the harness and held him in my arms. The crimson ramparts had changed to gold, and a gold mist drifted over the sky. I turned his head so that he faced the stone cliffs as they changed to purple, and that first star came out. The next morning, Tallboy left to go into the canyon. He wanted to find out if any of the Long Knives were camped there, or if any other tribes, the Apaches or the Utes, had come while we were gone. The old horse had grown slow and lame, so he left it behind and went on foot. In 2 days he returned, carrying a braided rope, which he had picked up somewhere, and 2 horseshoes. I saw no Indians, he said, while we were breaking camp. No signs of the Long Knives. Nothing has changed. After a time, but not right away, I asked, Did you see any of my sheep? One, he said, on the trail to the mesa. It had more hair than a buffalo. At first I thought it was a buffalo. It has not been shorn for a long time, I said. Nor will it be shorn soon, my husband answered. It is wilder than a mountain sheep. You will have to catch it in a trap. But after you catch it, how will you shear it? I do not know. I have shears, I said. I hid them in the cave when we left. You hid many things, Tallboy said. We will need many things, I answered. The river ran full. Blue snow water brimmed over the banks and flowed into the meadow. The cornfield was the same field that the Long Knives had left. The peach trees, which they had stripped of bark, stood in black rows. Our hogan was still a ring of gray ashes and tumbleweeds. We stopped there and talked, deciding where we would go. The high mesa is safe, my husband said. But if the Long Knives come, we will be cut off from water like we were before. From water and from the sheep, I said. What sheep? Tallboy asked. The one that looks like a buffalo? There is a small canyon where the river forks, I said. I've been there with my sheep. It has grass and a spring comes out of a rock. It is hidden from the big canyon so that you can pass by and not know that it is there. Let us go then to this place, Tallboy said. And I started off, leading the way along the river to the big rocks that stood at the entrance to the hidden canyon. The rocks and the gnarled sycamores that grew among them formed a low, winding corridor, and Tallboy had to climb down from the horse to get through. Hidden Canyon was just as I remembered it. The yellow cliffs rose on all sides. The spring flowed from the rock and made a waterfall that the wind caught and spun out over the meadow. On the far side of the meadow was the grove of wild plums where I had picked many handfuls of fruit. The trees now were covered with white and pink blossoms, but I had forgotten the cave. Tallboy saw it at once. "A good place," he said, and he went off to explore it. The cave was on the face of the western cliff, where the morning sun shone first. It was about 30 feet from the ground and twice that many feet in width. To reach it, there were handholds cut into the soft yellow stone, but some were worn away, and I had never tried to use them. Indians had lived there a long time ago and left, but no one knew why. Tallboy started to chip away at the handholds using the knife that I had found at Bosque Redondo. He dug out 4 of the holes and tried them. I held my breath. I feared that he would never be able to make his way up the face of that cliff. Even with 2 good hands, it was not an easy climb. But he went up, and he came down with no trouble. "See," he said to his son, "it is easy. Before long, you will be able to climb. For your mother, we will stretch a rope which she can hold on to." Clouds were gathering, and he started working on my handholds again. While I watched him, my black dog pointed his ears, and I heard a small noise. It came from the far side of the meadow near the wild plum trees, and I walked in that direction. I had not gone far out of the tall grass when I saw an ewe looking at me. She turned away as I reached her, but she did not flee. Her coat was thick and full of burrs. Beside her was a lamb, not more than a few days old. I took my son from his carrying board and held him up so that he could see the lamb. He wanted to touch it, but with both hands he was grasping a toy which his father had given him, a willow spear tipped with stone. Tallboy had made a song about the long knives and how the spear would kill many of them. Every night he sang his song to his son. I took the spear and dropped it in the grass and stepped upon it, hearing it snap beneath my feet. My son touched the lamb once before the 2 men moved away from us. He looked up at me and laughed, and I laughed with him. Rain had begun to fall. It made a hissing sound in the tall grass as we started toward the cave high up in the western cliff. Tallboy had finished the steps and handholds and now stood under the cave's stone lips, waving at us. I waved back at him and hurried across the meadow. I raised my face to the falling rain. It was Navajo rain. The end. So that finishes up the story of Sing Down the Moon. Thank you for joining me over these last 12 videos and answering the questions for each video. There's an activity for you to do on Google Classroom after listening to this video. I know it was longer than the others, but I did want to finish up all of the book this week so that we can start on Sylvia Aki next week. So take your time, do the activity, stay awesome, and I will see you real soon.